Hello and welcome to my studio. I'm Jansen Ridenauer, and I primarily focus on comic books and creating a kind of comic book graphic novel about Black mental health using a kind of a horror and comedy lens. So, with that, and how it ties into the research I did on R.V. Smith and his work, there's this really wonderful method of juxtaposing images and textures and content in a way that is subversive and really interesting to the eye that I try to emulate. So I will share some of that work that I have now. Behind me, you can see some of my sketches of finished pages I have with my main character, which is Mercy, stretched out over there, over here. And as she deals with a manifestation of her Jungian shadow, which is this character here. This is kind of an introductory chapter, and so it's literally a Black minstrel show about how she is seen as a Black woman in America, and how race and racism and all of its nuances can affect her mental health. Using all these stereotyped images, and how does a person deal with that? And this is really coming from my personal experience, because I adore Carl Jung, but he never really had any Black patients. So what does the Jungian shadow look like for a Black person in America? You end up with this. But yeah, so you have a Black minstrel show talking about these things and these kind of images that I borrowed a lot from R.V. Smith. In fact, his use of the Black Sambo character in one of his paintings I borrowed directly. But this is really only a facet. I also borrowed Dr. Newsom Maximus, which are clearly pointing towards the kind of unfortunate representations of Mickey Mouse and Dr. Seuss, Cat in the Hat. But what's really interesting, I found from my practice, is the juxtaposition and pushing that further. And what I came up with was the Cuddly Klansman. And here he is. And he's scented like cozy campfire, super soft, hand-embroidered patch. And the entire purpose of this was to make something so comforting and discomforting at the same time, which I think I did, because you can squeeze him. Yeah, it's very, very, very confusing. It gets a lot of different interesting reactions, but it's actually turned out to be a really great litmus test for racial stamina. Like, how well can a person talk about and deal with issues of race, and it's a wonderful experiment in post-irony, meta-irony, and generational humor. Gen Z tends to find it hysterical. Millennials, for the most part, do. Gen Xers, less so. I've had really mixed reviews with Gen Xers, and baby boomers do not get it at all. Just very interesting. But that's one way I push this juxtaposition kind of notion of literally rebranding white supremacy into a more cuddly notion, which is something that happens quite a lot. We just don't really see it, at least because we're just exposed to it so often. I've also started kind of doing these explorations into found objects and everyday objects, and creating these mouse traps like this. And essentially, it was just a regular mouse trap, but I realized the mouse kind of looks like a Klansman if you put it upside down. And so what goes in the actual trap when you set it, it's a little piece of cheese, and on this one it says inclusion and equity. Because there's some facets of equity and inclusion that are almost counteractive to their aims that I kind of want to point to. and that as a Black individual, when you're put in this position of trying to make use of these programs of equity and inclusion, it often feels like a trap. You become a Black ambassador. You kind of have to speak for people that you really shouldn't be speaking for, because everybody has their own voice and experience. And so even with equity and inclusion, as far as it's been executed in my experience, it tends to make a Black experience monolithic yet again. So it's a trap. And that's what I did with that. And then I've also started exploring abstract work as it pertains to my mental health and race and racism. And I'll show a few of those. What we have here is ink on canvas. I'm calling it White Flight. It's really taking a look at kind of the migration patterns from city centers to rural suburbs, and how there's this constant white line cutting through the canvas, moving outward. And below that, one that I've started calling Double Consciousness, intended to represent a neural pathway. We have this organic smattering of black with these rigid white lines coming through at different angles, and the black trying to adhere to it and move and live around it, yet it still cuts through. And this one over here, which is still in progress, which I'm calling Red Record, based off of Ida B. Wells' Red Record, the book on the statistics of lynchings in America in the 1890s. So this is how I've been exploring things, and trying to do so in a way that is close to what R.V. Smith does without being R.V. Smith. And so all these characters behind me, or these iterations of the same characters, is this constant dialectical conversation that a Black individual has to have with themselves about how they're seen, how their community's seen, what they have to do to fight that interpretation of them, how to deal with the real life ramifications of these interpretations of stereotypes. And it can boil down to even having a census. Right, where did I go? Well, even having a census where, the white box is above the black box or brown box. And this one it says nigga for dramatic effect. But yeah, even the US Census has a race hierarchy, which is very bizarre. I understand it entirely. Racism has intrinsic benefits for those who benefit from it. That's kind of its purpose. But for me, and similar to R.V. Smith, I really just want to create work that doesn't fix anything but keeps people talking after this strange cycle slows down, because every quarter century or so an inciting event happens, people get very concerned about Black welfare and Black lives, and then over the span of like 5, 10, 15 years it dies down, people think things are fixed and better, and then it gets forgotten about completely except for those who it affects, and then another 25 years an inciting event happens again. So my only real goal is to create content to disrupt that pattern, so that these things stay in a conversation rather than just fall by the wayside. And that's kind of how I've integrated my research paper into what I do. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you don't, I'm sorry, but I really hope you do. Bye.